Hey guys, tonight we're slipping softly into the warm golden dusk of a Theban courtyard. The air is thick with the scent of lotus blossoms and sandalwood smoke, and somewhere nearby, you can hear the gentle splash of water in a carved limestone fountain. A fan stirs the still heat, slowly, rhythmically, while you recline against embroidered cushions. Bronze mirrors reflect glints of candlelight, and the polished stone floor is cool under your toes. You reach for a fig and notice your fingertips, stained faintly with ochre from the pigment you tried earlier, not quite evenly applied. No matter. Everyone's watching the host anyway, and tonight, she's glowing. Literally glowing. Her skin shimmers like burnished gold, and it's not a trick of the torchlight. That color. Intentional. That shine. Hard-earned. Because in ancient Egypt, beauty wasn't just about looking nice for a party, it was a daily declaration of status, divinity, and survival. And you probably wouldn't have survived a week. The heat, the flies, the public standards. There were no off days. You were either radiating eternal vitality or suspiciously human, and who wanted that? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Drop it in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You'd start by understanding that ancient Egyptians didn't separate beauty from health, or from the divine. Physical attractiveness was seen as a reflection of spiritual balance. That's why elite tombs were stocked not just with food and tools, but entire vanity kits. Makeup wasn't optional. In fact, it was protective. Like sunscreen and armor. And most of all, it was a way to channel power. The signature look. Skin like polished amber, eyes rimmed in deep black or forest green. Men and women both, no exceptions. If your skin was pale, it didn't suggest aristocracy. It suggested you weren't outside enough. You weren't thriving. You weren't kissed by Ra, the sun god, and you weren't fit for public admiration. Tanned, glossy skin meant you were full of life, like the Nile in flood season. And if you were really going for it, you'd enhance that tone using ochre mixed with oil, or sometimes red clay for a rosier, more dramatic effect. That glossy sheen you notice on statues or wall paintings. Not a coincidence. Ancient artists exaggerated the radiance of living skin to suggest health and favor from the gods. There's one temple frieze that shows Queen Nefertari walking past rows of servants, her skin dark gold and polished to the point of gleaming. She's not sweating, she's radiant. The ancient equivalent of walking around with a ring light. But the real standout, the first thing you'd notice in any crowd, was the eyes. Picture thick lines of black stretching beyond the natural eyelid, curling upward and outward in feline strokes. You're not imagining Cleopatra-style eyeliner by accident, that look goes back over 2,000 years before her. Egyptians used kohl, a substance made by grinding galena, a form of lead sulfide, into fine dust and mixing it with oils or animal fat. Yes, they knew it was dangerous. But they also believed it protected the eyes from the harsh sun, and even warded off evil spirits. So, risk of blindness? Worth it. Historians still argue whether kohl had any actual medicinal benefits or if it was purely psychological, but the Egyptians swore by it. They even used it on children. In fact, one fringe theory suggests that parents applied eyeliner to babies not just to protect them from the glare of the sun, but also to mark them spiritually, like a divine Instagram filter for infants. And the color palette wasn't limited to black. Malachite, a bright green copper ore, was crushed into powder and applied around the eyes to enhance depth and dimension. This wasn't a pop of color situation, it was a full-on, sacred aesthetic. Green symbolized regeneration and the fertile banks of the Nile. A woman walking into a temple with emerald-lined eyes wasn't just showing off her makeup skills, she was carrying the visual weight of an entire civilization's spiritual identity on her face. There's something mesmerizing about imagining daily life in a world where this level of presentation was expected. You don't just roll out of bed and dab on some lip balm. You start with a cleansing ritual using natron salts or crushed lotus petals. You exfoliate. You moisturize with castor or morena oil. Then the pigments come out, red ochre for the cheeks, kohl and malachite for the eyes, henna for the hands and nails. And you'd better be good at symmetry. The ancient mirrors weren't great. Of course, not everyone had access to the finest oils or freshest minerals. The rich used spoons carved from ivory or scented wood to apply their makeup. The poor used their fingers. But everyone wore something. Even workers were found buried with simple coal pots. And this brings us to a strange little detail you might not expect: men were just as concerned about looking good. Pharaohs had personal cosmetic teams. Male priests wore eye makeup during rituals. Soldiers went into battle with eyeliner on, not just to intimidate, but to signal favor from the gods. There's an actual mural that shows a captain applying his kohl before setting off for war. It's like watching a general stop to curl his lashes before battle. One little known tidbit. There's some evidence that certain elite men painted not only their eyes but also their nipples with red ochre, possibly to appear more vigorous or seductive. That one may not catch on again anytime soon. But it's a reminder that beauty was seen in full body terms, not just faces. Now, whether they truly believed in the protective magic of makeup, or just enjoyed looking sharp, is still up for debate. Historians argue whether the spiritual purpose came first, or if people just needed a really good reason to justify their obsession with glam. But either way, it worked. And it stuck. The cosmetic styles of ancient Egypt echoed across empires, influencing Greek, Persian, and even early Roman beauty. Cleopatra didn't invent her look. She inherited it, like a carefully mixed pot of kohl passed down through centuries. So, you adjust your cushion, take another sip of fig wine, and glance at the tray beside you. It holds a mirror, polished bronze, warm to the touch, and a small pot of thick black paste. You dip your finger in, just a little, and draw a line across your lower lid. It feels cool at first. Then slightly gritty. But when you blink, your reflection stares back with that unmistakable Egyptian intensity. Powerful. Alive. Beautiful. You wake the next morning to the soft rustle of linen curtains and the low murmur of servants preparing oils. The air is already warming, but your head is cool, too cool. You reach up instinctively, and instead of thick braids or soft curls, your fingers meet, nothing. Smooth scalp. And in this version of your life, that's not a mishap. It's intentional. Because in ancient Egypt, baldness wasn't a loss, it was liberation. Hair, to the Egyptians, was complicated. It could be powerful, seductive, even holy, but also dirty, hot, and a breeding ground for lice. So for many, especially those with money, the most beautiful hair was the kind you could take off and store in a box. And if you had no natural hair at all, even better. You were a blank canvas. The average elite man or woman would have their head shaved regularly, sometimes entirely. Children too. Priests were completely depilate, scalp, body, even eyebrows, so they could approach the gods in a state of ritual purity. But that didn't mean they just went around bareheaded. Quite the opposite. That smooth skull was a foundation. The perfect base for wigs. Ah, wigs. You slip into the wig room, yes, there were whole wig rooms in some estates, and choose from a dazzling array. Some are shoulder-length and tightly curled, some braided into complicated cascading layers, others towering and beaded with lapis lazuli. Human hair was best. Imported Indian or Nubian hair was even better. If you were middle class, you might wear a wool blend instead, or plant fibers carefully dyed black. Either way, the goal was fullness, style, and scent. Always scent. Because wigs weren't just about covering your head, they were wearable art. They signaled status, fashion sense, even mood. There's evidence that women changed their wigs for different occasions, much like you might swap earrings or heels today. One day might call for an elaborate style with long braids and inlaid gold thread. Another might require a simpler wig with curled ends and scented beeswax to hold the shape. Yes, beeswax. Fringe detail, but a fun one. Egyptians didn't have modern mousse or gel, so they used what they had. Beeswax could be mixed with resin and applied like ancient pomade. The result? Slick, shiny, and impressively enduring styles. Wigs have been recovered from tombs after thousands of years, still holding their shape. And if you were really going for the look, you'd top it off with a perfumed wax cone. These strange little cones were worn on the head during banquets and special ceremonies. For years, historians thought they were symbolic, maybe only depicted in art. But in 2019, archaeologists actually found physical remains of a wax cone buried with a woman in Amarna. The cone slowly melted throughout the evening, releasing sweet-smelling oils down the back and over the wig, an elegant drip, like wearing scented icing on your hair. And sure, melting wax might sound impractical now, but it was a sensory experience. You'd feel the warm trickle over your scalp. Smell the myrrh or lotus as it drifted through the courtyard. Watch as it darkened the glossy black strands of your wig. You weren't just attending a dinner. You were being admired. For men, wigs were just as important. Pharaohs had royal wig styles, short and square, often with side flaps or braids. Officials and scribes might wear wigs with layered curls, carefully aligned. And while facial hair was generally seen as unclean, a styled fake beard, especially the plaited kind you tie on with ribbons, was reserved for divinity and power. Even female pharaohs like Hatshepsut wore ceremonial beards in official statues. It wasn't gendered, it was sacred. Historians still argue whether wigs were worn daily by all social classes or if they were reserved primarily for elite functions. There's some debate about how common it was for laborers or farmers to own even a simple wig, though tomb paintings occasionally depict them in modest versions during festivals. What we do know is that wigs were cherished. They were cleaned, perfumed, repaired. They were inherited. And when someone died, their favorite wig often went with them, packed carefully for the afterlife. One quirky tidbit, some wealthier families even had wig servants. These attendants specialized in maintaining, brushing, and arranging the household's hairpieces. Not unlike having your own hair stylist on call, but every day. And yet, not everyone hid their baldness. Shaved heads had their own visual language. They meant you were disciplined, possibly connected to priesthood or temple service. The absence of hair could be beautiful too, a sign of control, of ritual purity. Think less, bare, and more, intentional. There's even an ancient instructional text that advises priests to shave the head smooth like polished stone, so the soul may enter without obstruction. Spiritual exfoliation, if you will. If you're imagining the desert sun baking your bald scalp, you'd be right to worry. That's why most people wore lightweight head coverings or carried fans. Or stayed in the shade. Or wore elaborate headdresses with fabric veils that framed the wig like a halo. There's a famous depiction of a noblewoman with a gold cobra circlet pressing her wig down just slightly, as if it's too heavy for her posture, but perfect for her status. Even children's hair was stylized with intention. You might have seen little ones with the distinctive side lock of youth, a single, long braid or curl hanging from an otherwise shaved head. This wasn't a weird trend or bad barber job. It marked a child's age and social identity, worn until puberty and often depicted in art when referencing the child form of gods like Horus. And here's the thing, no matter your gender, class, or age, how you handled your hair, or lack thereof, was a public expression. Did you dare to go completely smooth? Did you choose short curls or long braids? Were you subtly perfumed or dripping with frankincense? Did your wig come from the markets of Thebes, or was it a Nubian import? These weren't minor details. They were your entire look. Your social resume. Your Instagram grid in real life. So, as you sit on the edge of your carved stool, someone behind you begins combing strands into place. You can feel the tug, not harsh, but precise. A dab of oil follows, rubbed into the fibers with gentle fingers. The wig settles on your head like a crown. Cool. Heavy. Intoxicating. You glance into a polished mirror and see someone transformed, not hidden, but elevated. You don't miss your real hair. This is better. This is beauty, Egyptian style. It's mid-morning now, and the sun climbs lazily up the sandstone walls, painting the air gold. You've stepped into a small private chamber that smells like dreams. Not incense exactly, but something softer, rounder. A mixture of frankincense, lotus, and desert myrrh, all warmed in ceramic bowls set atop glowing embers. The light here is dappled through a linen curtain, and beside you, ivory jars line a carved shelf, each sealed with wax and bound in linen thread. One by one, you begin to open them, and every jar sings. If ancient Egypt had a love language, it was scent. Perfume wasn't a finishing touch. It was the beginning. The middle. The core of how you prepared yourself to be seen, touched, remembered. Before you painted your eyes or braided your wig, you anointed your body with oils, neck, chest, behind the ears, between the toes. Fragrance was not about seduction in the modern sense. It was about cleanliness, godliness, and status. And if you didn't smell like anything, that wasn't neutral. That was suspicious. And it wasn't just people. Temples were drenched in scent. Statues of the gods were bathed daily in perfumed oils. Letters to the dead included requests for specific fragrances to accompany offerings. You might find a small jar tucked into a burial pit, not filled with coins, but with scent. Because even in the afterlife, no one wanted to be remembered as musty. The most prized oils were extracted from lilies, cinnamon bark, cedar, and the blue lotus flower, a blossom that opens in the morning and sinks underwater by dusk, just like the sun. And since that flower was linked to rebirth, slathering yourself in lotus oil meant more than smelling nice. It meant aligning with the rhythm of the universe. Just another Tuesday. There's a mainstream belief that Cleopatra soaked the sails of her ship in perfume so strong, it reached the shore before she did. That might be dramatic, but it's not far off the mark. Wealthy women wore scent as an aura. Their rooms, linens, and wigs all held the same notes. They didn't arrive, they were announced. The fringe theory. Some say that scent, not gold, was Egypt's most lucrative export. There's evidence that elaborate distillation techniques were in use as early as 1500 BCE. Perfume recipes were state secrets. Oils were stored in carved alabaster jars, sealed tight and often buried with the dead. The perfume industry wasn't a sideline, it was sacred economy. And while most Egyptians couldn't afford a full cabinet of imported oils, scent still made its way into daily life. Even basic hygiene included scented materials. Soap made from animal fat and natron, Egypt's favorite mineral compound, was often enhanced with pine resin or herbs. You didn't just wash. You blessed your skin. Historians still argue whether perfumes were primarily worn for social display, ritual purification, or actual medicinal benefit. There's a compelling case for all three. Some fragrances were believed to repel insects, others to treat illness, and many to protect the soul from evil forces. Smell wasn't just sensory. It was spiritual. And the way scent was delivered? Incredibly creative. There were scented cones and wax pastilles worn in the wig, as we mentioned earlier. But there were also infused fabrics, beads soaked in essential oils and worn on anklets, and even perfumed collars made of fresh petals strung like garlands and pinned to the chest. A guest might arrive at your banquet already fragrant, but you'd offer them a floral collar anyway, because to dine unscented was borderline offensive. Even cosmetics were scented. That black kohl lining your eyes? sometimes blended with crushed clove for a spicy undertone. Your red ochre lip stain, infused with cinnamon oil or cardamom. It wasn't just about pigment, it was about presence. You walked into a room with color and with memory. A living sigil. You might picture yourself now, reclined on cushions in a shaded alcove. A servant pours a thin stream of lotus oil from a narrow alabaster flask into your palm. The oil is thick, almost honey-like. You rub it into your arms, watching it glisten on your skin, and the scent rises, not sharp or floral, but deep and mellow, like baked petals and warm rain. It makes your whole body exhale. For men, the rules were no different. Soldiers carried scented amulets into battle. Scribes kept oil jars at their desks. Even tomb workers wore perfumes, perhaps to ward off the smells of death, or perhaps just to remind themselves they were still alive. One particularly strange detail. Archaeologists discovered a 3,000-year-old vial near Thebes that still smelled faintly of cinnamon when opened. Imagine that, scent outlasting empires. Your perfume may fade in an hour. Theirs endured millennia. Now that's long wear. And yes, some Egyptians overdid it. There are satirical poems that joke about men walking around like mobile incense burners. One depicts a courtier so drenched in myrrh that bees follow him to dinner. Another jabs at a woman whose perfume arrives long before her manners. Smell, like fashion, was a balancing act. You had to glow, but not blind. Still, it's hard to imagine anyone resisting the daily ritual of scent. You wake. You cleanse. You oil. Your body is not just a vehicle, it's an altar. Each gesture says, I am clean. I am sacred. I am ready. Perfume wasn't gendered. It wasn't optional. It was atmospheric. Think of it as your background music, your mood lighting, your brand identity. And even children were introduced to fragrance early. Oil was part of birth rituals, part of weaning, part of mourning. There was no moment in life not touched by scent. Even love letters were sprinkled with perfume granules, pressed into beeswax tablets and heated to release their essence. An ancient aromatherapy love note. And perhaps the most poetic of all. The belief that the gods themselves were made of scent. In hymns, the breath of Ra is called the wind of myrrh. The skin of Osiris is oil and lotus. Heaven doesn't smell like clouds. It smells like cedar and cardamom. There's one last image you should hold before we move on. Picture a noble woman at dusk, seated at her dressing table in front of a bronze mirror. Her hair is braided, her kohl is perfect, but she isn't finished. She reaches for the final jar, the one reserved for special occasions. She dips 2 fingers inside, lifts a bit of golden oil to her collarbone, and smooths it down her chest. Her skin catches the last of the sun's light and seems to glow from within. She smiles at her reflection, but it's the scent, heady, herbal, ancient, that will linger in the minds of everyone who passes her that night. So you rise slowly, slipping your fingers once more into the cool oil. You smooth it behind your ears, down the line of your collarbone, and over the pulse point at your wrist. The scent clings. It anchors. It makes you feel not just alive, but divine. And for just a moment, with your eyes closed and your whole body humming with scent, you forget that this world is ancient. It feels near. Familiar. Beautifully human. You're still warm with oil and scent when you're led down a corridor carved with lotus-tipped columns. The shade is thick and quiet, and the echo of your footsteps feels almost sacred. At the end of the hallway, a chamber opens, not a bedroom, not a sitting room. Something else. A vanity space, yes, but more like a shrine. Because in ancient Egypt, applying makeup wasn't merely personal grooming. It was prayer. Here, even cosmetics had spiritual weight. And they didn't stop being useful when you stopped breathing. If anything, they became more essential. You weren't just beautifying your living body, you were preparing it to meet the gods. Laid out before you, trays of pigment-stained shells, alabaster pots sealed with beeswax, tiny spoons made from ivory, bronze, and wood, some shaped like dancing girls, others like birds in flight. You pick up one with a monkey carved on the handle, worn smooth from daily use. The bowl holds a crumb of faded red. Not lipstick. Not exactly. But close. This was a full-body approach. Lips, cheeks, chest, hands, any visible skin could be touched with color. For beauty. For power. For eternity. You lean closer to the pigments. One is green, malachite. You've seen that one before, used for eyeshadow and eyeliner alike. Another is dark black, made from galena, the mineral kohl came from. A third is brick red, the red ochre used for cheeks and lips, powdered from iron-rich clay found near the Nile. These weren't cheap. They were labor-intensive, often imported or mined from sacred areas. And they weren't applied casually. Makeup in Egypt was ritualistic. You didn't just put on your face. You prepared it, like painting a sacred statue. Each stroke meant something. Each pigment carried associations. Black lined your eyes like the protective gaze of Horus. Green renewed you. Red gave you vitality. Color was theology. And it wasn't reserved for women. Men used cosmetics with the same seriousness. Priests adorned their faces before ceremonies. Scribes added color before addressing royalty. Even mummification rituals included painted details, eyelids outlined, lips tinted, nails dipped in henna. Death was no excuse to show up looking tired. You step closer to a set of canopic jars tucked in a corner, used to store a person's internal organs after embalming. They're sealed and silent, but beside them lies something more intimate, a cosmetic chest. It's small, lacquered, with intricate patterns and a delicate clasp. You open it carefully and find traces of pigment still stuck in the corners. Someone, once, held this box in living hands. They dipped brushes into these colors. They saw themselves in a mirror and smiled, or worried. Or adjusted. That same person might have taken the box with them to the grave. Because beauty wasn't vanity, it was preparation. Your body had to be recognizable in the afterlife. Not abstract. Not symbolic. You. The best version of you. You didn't want to arrive at the Hall of Ma'at looking ragged. Your heart would be weighed against a feather. You wanted your eyeliner sharp. One mainstream fact that often surprises people, tombs frequently contained not just pigment and applicators, but instructions, spells, even, to help the dead remember how to use them. The Book of the Dead included lines like, "Anoint the brow with oil and blacken the eyes like Horus." Cosmetics weren't just helpful, they were protective tools, part of your soul's defense kit. And speaking of the soul, Egyptian theology believed in multiple parts of the self. The Ka, your life force. The Ba, your personality or mobility after death. The Ak, your fully realized spirit. And all of them, weirdly enough, benefited from looking put together. There's a kind of cosmic bureaucracy involved, everyone's judging your outfit. Now, here's a quirky fringe tidbit. Some archaeologists believe certain cosmetic containers were intentionally shaped like body parts, a foot, a breast, even an ear. So that the wearer could whisper to that part of the body what they desired it to be. Soft. Attractive. Fertile. Kind of like complimenting your own reflection, but with extra steps and a lot more metaphysical backup. And mirrors, oh, the mirrors. They weren't made of glass, of course. Polished bronze, mostly, sometimes silver for the extremely wealthy. Round, handheld, attached to ornate handles shaped like papyrus stalks or goddesses with long limbs. When you looked into one, the reflection wasn't just yours, it was your projection, your offering. Some mirrors were even dedicated to Hathor, goddess of beauty and joy. Looking at yourself became devotional. Historians still debate whether most people had access to real mirrors or whether they relied on polished ceramics, bowls of water, or reflective obsidian. The elite certainly had them. But there's evidence that even modest households owned fragments, cracked but usable. A sliver of self, held carefully in the hand, still did the trick. And then there were the scented pastes, solid perfumes made from fat, resin, and flowers, used almost like a balm. Applied not just to the skin, but to the temples, the feet, even between the shoulder blades. One paste found in a noblewoman's tomb still bore the imprint of her fingertip, pressed down like she was just here. A ghost touch. She'd scented herself for the journey to the stars. There's even evidence that some cosmetics served medical purposes. Certain red ochres had antibacterial properties. Kohl may have helped reduce eye infections. Malachite contained trace copper that could stimulate immune responses, though too much, of course, was dangerous. You weren't just painting your body. You were defending it. One lesser-known detail, in some tombs, artists painted the deceased with eyeliner after embalming was complete. Not because the body would use it, but because the gods were thought to recognize souls through the eyes. If yours were unlined, unpainted, undefined, you might not be seen at all. You run your fingers lightly over the edge of the cosmetic box and feel the grooves where a brush once rested. It's strangely moving. Not because it's glamorous, but because it's so human. This wasn't abstract history. Someone got up, sighed, reached for pigment, and tried again. Just like you do. Just like anyone does. There's something haunting about realizing how deeply people cared about presentation, not for society, but for the gods. For memory. For comfort. You didn't wear makeup to impress your neighbor. You wore it to remain whole. To face eternity with composure. With color. And finally, a single painted figurine tucked in the corner catches your eye. It's a woman, head tilted upward, with cheeks glowing red and eyes perfectly rimmed in black. In her hand is a tiny mirror. Not looking into it. Offering it. As if to say, now it's your turn. So as you hold the brush now, its bristles long gone, but its handle smooth and warm, you imagine dipping it into crushed green, swiping it gently along your own eyelid. The motion is slow, familiar, almost automatic. You know what you're doing. You've done it 1,000 times before. Or perhaps, somehow, you remember. And in this quiet moment, you understand something strange and sweet. Beauty, here, was not just an expression of self. It was an act of faith. An ancient promise, painted on every face, alive or dead, that said, I was here. I mattered. I prepared. You step out into the sun again, and for a moment, you feel it, not the heat, not the breeze, but the eyes. Not literal ones. Imagined ones. Eyes of neighbors, servants, spirits, ancestors, gods. Watching, always watching. Because in ancient Egypt, beauty wasn't a personal affair. It was performance. And above all, it was youth that drew the longest gaze. To be youthful was not simply to be young. It was to be blessed. Protected. Favored by the gods. Old age wasn't scorned exactly, but it wasn't idealized either. The perfect human form, painted again and again on tomb walls and temple columns, wasn't gray-haired and wrinkled, it was smooth-skinned, upright, symmetrical, and somehow timeless. Whether you were 17 or 70, the image they painted of you in your tomb would be the same, ageless perfection. You're beginning to understand, now, why beauty mattered so much. Because for the Egyptians, it wasn't fleeting. It was eternal. The body, preserved by ointment and linen and spell, would one day rise. And when it did, it needed to look ready. Even statues of old pharaohs, men who had ruled for decades, who had suffered wars and outlived children, were carved with full lips, bright eyes, and impossibly smooth cheeks. That wasn't denial. That was aspiration. You weren't hiding age. You were choosing your forever face. In daily life, youthfulness was cultivated carefully. Oils weren't just for scent, they softened the skin, slowed wrinkling, prevented sun damage. Women massaged castor oil into their faces and hands, rubbed crushed fenugreek seeds over laugh lines, and mixed milk with honey into masks that promised dewiness, long before the word skincare existed. And no, they didn't call it self-care. But they absolutely meant it that way. Even bathing had its role. While not everyone bathed daily, the elite certainly tried. Water drawn from special pools, heated in ceramic basins, mixed with natron salts and scented with lotus or mint. Exfoliation was done with ground pumice or fine sand. Nails were polished. Teeth brushed with sticks coated in crushed herbs. Not because it was fashionable. Because it was vital. The cleaner and more youthful your body, the more divine it seemed. Here's one mainstream fact: the goddesses were almost always depicted young: Hathor, Isis, even Sekhmet. No gray hairs, no tired joints. If aging was honorable, it was still never aestheticized. Only one god, Thoth, occasionally shows signs of age, and even then, more in wisdom than in body. The human form, at its best, hovered in the space between maturity and youth. Experienced, yes. But radiant. Always radiant. One quirky detail. Henna wasn't just for coloring nails and hair. Some women used it to tint their fingers and toes a soft reddish-orange, subtle, but youthful. There are even writings that hint at mixing henna with crushed dates and leaving it overnight as a kind of firming mask. Sticky? Yes. But glowing? Definitely. And youth, of course, was also mimicked. Wigs weren't just tools for style, they covered thinning hair, grey temples, patchy beards. A new wig could buy you back 20 years. Kohl made your eyes seem wider, brighter, more alert. Red ochre added color where blood had long since begun to withdraw. Beauty wasn't about pretending to be someone else. It was about remembering who you once were, and putting that version back on like a beloved robe. Historians still argue whether age-based beauty standards were class-dependent, whether working-class Egyptians, who labored in fields and quarries, idealized youth as intensely as the elite did. Some say no, that practicality ruled in poorer homes. Others point to burial figurines of commoners painted with youthful features and neatly curled wigs as proof that even among the humble, the ageless body was the desired one. And when you look at funerary masks, you notice something else: everyone, from pharaoh to farmer, is painted with the same gentle symmetry. No deep wrinkles. No sagging jowls. Full cheeks. Calm smiles. Eyeliner sharp enough to please the gods. This wasn't vanity. It was symbolic rebirth. In your own hand now is a small clay pot, sealed with wax. You break it open gently and find a cream inside, thick, soft, the color of pale amber. It smells faintly of almonds. This might have been applied every morning across the chest and shoulders. You scoop a bit with your fingertip and smooth it into your skin. It melts easily, leaving behind no shimmer, only a sense of silk. You pause. You look at your hands. For a moment, they seem younger, not because they are, but because you've been reminded how to notice them. And it wasn't just appearance. Movement mattered too. Posture, poise, the angle of your chin. To move like a youthful person, gracefully, deliberately, with the spine long and the steps light, was a form of beauty in itself. Instructional texts even advised women to walk like water flows, smoothly, steadily, without sharp edges. A youthful woman didn't bounce. She glided. There's an inscription on one tomb wall that praises a woman by saying she was as a breeze in the shade. That wasn't about her conversation. It was about how she moved through a room. Lightly. Coolly. Present, but never pressing. To embody youth wasn't to be loud, it was to be easeful. You pass a relief on the temple wall, 3 women playing harps. Each has the same softly rounded arms, the same high cheekbones, the same long, dark wig parted in the center. Their dresses cling to them like wind-blown linen. Not one looks older than 25. They're not individuals. They're ideals. And yet, somehow, they still feel real. Because beauty in Egypt wasn't about sameness. It was about essence. You didn't need to be a specific age. You needed to feel timeless. To cultivate what they called nefer, a concept blending beauty, goodness, harmony, and perfection. A person could be nefer in face, in voice, in scent, in behavior. And nefer didn't age. It shimmered eternally, like the sun on the Nile. So you sit now by the water, watching papyrus stalks sway in the heat. You dip your fingers in the river, feel its coolness, and smear a bit of wet silt over your arms, just as children did. Somewhere nearby, a young girl hums as she combs oil through her sister's wig. A boy splashes water at his reflection. A priest chants an old hymn about everlasting life. And you? You close your eyes. The sun warms your face, and for a moment, the years fall away, not because you've forgotten them, but because they don't weigh you down here. Here, youth isn't something you chase. It's something you carry with you, like scent, or color, or breath. And maybe, just maybe, if the gods look closely, they'll see it too. Later in the day, you find yourself standing in front of a painted wall. Not a grand temple this time, but the inside of a private tomb, quiet, still, lit only by the flicker of an oil lamp you're holding aloft. The flame dances along the plaster, and the figures painted there seem to shift in its glow. Men carrying baskets, women pouring wine, children playing with birds, priests offering flowers. But what catches you isn't the activity. It's the bodies. Each one soft, smooth, and strangely identical. You step closer. No one has muscle tone. No one has wrinkles. The arms are rounded, the belly slightly full, the thighs strong but not sharp. You run your fingers gently over the cool surface and realize what you're looking at, beauty. Or at least, the Egyptian version of it. The ideal body in ancient Egypt wasn't chiseled. It wasn't thin. It wasn't tall or curvy or muscular in any modern sense. It was symmetrical. Balanced. Harmonious. A quiet kind of loveliness. Nothing extreme. Nothing loud. Think soft geometry. Think sculpted sand. Think grace. For women, that meant narrow shoulders, a gently rising chest, a long waist, and full hips, not exaggerated, but visible. The kind of body that suggests fertility without shouting about it. For men, it meant straight posture, long limbs, a firm but not bulky torso, and clean lines from shoulder to knee. Everyone's stomach looks like they just enjoyed a good meal and still had energy to walk to the river and back. There's no sucking in. There's no flexing. There's just ease. And this wasn't just art style, it was philosophy. Egyptians believed that inner harmony expressed itself in outer form. A well-proportioned body suggested a well-proportioned soul. If your limbs matched, if your movements flowed, if your presence felt balanced, you were likely aligned with Ma'at, the concept of truth, justice, and cosmic order. In other words, looking good wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about spiritual geometry. Here's a mainstream fact: in tomb paintings spanning over 1,000 years, the human body changes very little. Hairstyles shift. Jewelry evolves. But the shape of the body remains stubbornly consistent. There's a visual calm in that, a message that beauty, when aligned with divine order, doesn't need reinvention. You pause at one figure, a woman holding a lotus blossom, mid-dance. Her fingers are delicately extended, her weight resting on one foot. Her other leg hovers, flexed at the knee, in a motion so poised it feels like a frame from a silent ballet. Her belly is soft. Her arms are rounded. Her face is serene. If you asked an artist today to paint sensuality without sex, elegance without effort, this would be it. And it's not just in tombs. You see the same bodies in temple carvings, on papyrus scrolls, on the handles of cosmetic jars, even carved into the legs of furniture. Beauty was etched into everything. Not as decoration. As guidance. There's one famous sculpture of Queen Nefertiti, not the bust you know, but a lesser-seen full-body statue. She's wearing a clinging linen dress, her arms at her sides, her head tilted slightly downward. She isn't posing. She's present. The lines of her dress curve gently over her frame, and there's no cinching, no exaggeration. Just grace. Self-contained. Timeless. One quirky tidbit. Some women of the elite class were depicted slightly plumper in statues than they may have been in life, not to suggest excess, but to hint at comfort, softness, the kind of luxury that implies you were well-fed, well-rested, and well-loved. It wasn't body inflation, it was body symbolism. And yet, historians still argue whether this softness was ever truly standard, or if it was more of a template, an aspirational outline that scribes and artisans followed regardless of the model. Some believe real people looked more diverse, but the art was restricted by formal rules. Others say the standard was real. That women and men actually styled themselves to approach these gentle proportions, avoiding extremes in either direction. Whatever the truth, the message is clear. You weren't expected to be extraordinary. You were expected to be in balance. Even the clothing emphasized this. Linen garments hugged the body without shaping it. There was no corseting, no padding, no illusion. If your form was a little round, it showed. If it was lean, it showed. But either way, the lines of the fabric encouraged flow. Beauty wasn't added to the body. It was revealed by it. You find a basket near the base of the wall. Inside are cosmetic tools, spoons, jars, a small mirror, and what looks like a carved ivory ruler. Not for measuring rooms. For measuring faces. There's some evidence that symmetry was evaluated deliberately, even obsessively, when it came to choosing brides or honoring court favorites. Not because asymmetry was ugly, but because symmetry was divine. You hold the ruler up to your own reflection in the bronze mirror, amused. Your nose is maybe not quite aligned. Your eyes a little different in shape. But under this flickering light, you still feel elegant. As though, in this room, with these pigments and oils and textures, you've stepped into something more forgiving. More ancient. More aware. Because here, no one's judging your abs or your cheekbones. Here, they're asking, do you move in balance? Do your gestures ripple softly through space? Do you return to stillness like a reed after the wind? Do you carry the kind of quiet that lets other people breathe? There's a reason the dead were painted as calm. Not bored. Complete. You weren't supposed to look intense. You were supposed to look settled. You step out into the next room, and there's another wall painting, this time of noblemen at a banquet. They're all lounging on couches, holding cups of wine. Their torsos are bare, their bellies gently rounded, their arms long and loose. They're laughing. Eating. Posing. And none of them are straining to look thinner. No one's puffing out his chest. You get the sense they aren't trying at all, and that's the whole point. One particularly interesting image shows a scribe seated cross-legged on the floor. His back is straight, his arms resting on his knees, his eyes focused downward. He's older, perhaps, but there's no sign of age in his body. Only stillness. Only form. He is, quite literally, a line drawing come to life. And it's beautiful. Another fringe theory. Some scholars believe symmetry and stillness were associated with the afterlife not just because of art, but because of embalming. The body at rest, in a symmetrical pose, was considered aesthetically ideal because it mirrored the position one would take in eternity. You weren't just modeling your body for life, you were rehearsing for the next one. So you touched the wall again, just briefly. The painted woman with her lotus. Her half-smile. Her bare feet curling into the earth. You wonder if she knew she'd be studied this closely, thousands of years later. Or maybe she didn't care. Maybe she knew what the Egyptians understood better than most, that the best kind of beauty is the kind that doesn't try too hard. And as you blow out your oil lamp, as the room falls into gentle shadow, you feel something curious in your spine, not tension, but alignment. Your breath slows. Your shoulders drop. Your feet settle evenly on the stone floor. And for a moment, you're not looking at beauty. You are part of it. Not because you're perfect. But because you are symmetrical. Quiet. Still. Balanced. The next morning begins before the sun. There's a hush over the courtyard as the sky lightens from indigo to gold, and the earth, still damp with dew, smells faintly of baked clay and crushed leaves. You stretch your arms, blink against the dim light, and reach instinctively for a jar beside your mat. Not water. Not food. A small, wide-mouthed pot of cleansing paste, the first step in your morning ritual. Because in ancient Egypt, beauty didn't happen on special occasions. It happened every day. Before the market opened, before temple chants began, before you even broke your fast, you prepared your face. It didn't matter who you were. Farmer or noble, merchant or priestess, man or woman or child, everyone had a routine. You didn't make yourself beautiful to be admired. You made yourself beautiful because it was the rhythm of the day. Like prayer. Like breath. And the rhythm began with ingredients, real ones. You reach for a shallow ceramic tray where you've already laid out your basics. A chalky brick of red ochre, a pinch of powdered galena, a few green flakes of malachite, dried mint leaves, a smear of old honey, and a flask of castor oil pressed from the seeds your mother stores in a basket by the kitchen door. There is no soap, not as you know it. Instead, natron, a pale mineral mix of sodium carbonate and bicarbonate found near dried lake beds. Sacred stuff. It purifies temples, it dries out the dead, and today, it scrubs your cheeks. You mix a little natron with water and honey, yes, honey, because it binds the grains and soothes the sting. Your fingers swirl the paste into a loose lather, and you smear it over your skin. It tingles. Then you rinse with cool water from an unglazed jar, and the stone basin darkens as the residue swirls down its drain. You pat dry with linen and breathe. You are now clean in body, and, according to belief, also in spirit. Now, color. For rouge, you scrape a bit of red ochre from your brick and crush it with a pestle. It stains your fingertips immediately. You add a few drops of castor oil, enough to bind it into a creamy paste. If you're feeling dry, a smear of animal fat, maybe goose, maybe crocodile, helps the pigment cling. The finished mixture is soft, warm, terracotta red. You dab it on the apples of your cheeks and across your lips. It smells earthy. Familiar. For your eyes, the options are sacred. First, kohl, made from finely ground galena, a natural lead sulfide mineral. You crush it carefully in a small bowl, using the flat end of a bronze rod. Then you add a touch of animal fat or gum resin, and stir until it becomes thick enough to hold shape. With a slender stick of wood or bone, you dip into the black paste and line your eyes, upper, lower, flicked slightly outward. The look is dramatic. But not showy. It's practical. The pigment blocks sun glare, deters flies, and, so they say, wards off evil. Historians still argue whether the lead content of kohl actually helped protect against infection or if its use was purely spiritual. But the truth is, it did both. Scientific studies have suggested low-dose lead exposure from ancient kohl may have boosted nitric oxide production in the skin, an accidental antiseptic. Somehow, beauty worked both cosmetically and medicinally. Next comes malachite, the green mineral. You grind it gently. It's softer than galena, more delicate. The powder is vibrant, shimmering slightly in the early sun. You add a drop of water and press it below your lash line, sometimes over the lid, sometimes in a long green sweep across the temple. The result is more than decorative. Green symbolized renewal, the eternal Nile, vegetation and rebirth. It wasn't just a color. It was a spell. And there's more. If you want extra softness, you can mix a mask using milk and clay. Goat's milk works best. Blend with a spoon of bentonite clay, if you're lucky enough to have some. Plus a little frankincense ash for its antimicrobial properties. Apply it thick to the face, wait until it tightens and cools, then wash away. You'll glow. For dry skin, there's morena oil, extracted from crushed seeds, sweet-smelling and rich in fatty acids. Or balanite's oil, from the desert date tree. Or just plain goose fat, if you're less picky. All of them seal in moisture. All of them gleam under sunlight. You apply oil after pigments, not before, unless you want it to smear. One quirky but practical trick. For deodorant, a mix of ground myrrh resin and natron, applied dry to the armpits. Or a smear of date wine vinegar mixed with crushed mint. It doesn't last all day, but it works long enough to visit the market without offending the gods, or your friends. Nail care. There's henna for that. You stir a little of the dried leaf powder with lemon juice and water, forming a muddy green paste. It smells sharp and grassy. You coat your fingertips, your nails, sometimes your palms or soles. After a few hours, you rinse it off to reveal a deep, orange-red stain that lasts for days. Subtle. But lovely. A quiet reminder of who you are. And none of this is rushed. These recipes take time. There are no shortcuts. Your grandmother showed you how to blend the pigments. Your mother showed you how to hold the mirror steady, even when the bronze warped your face into something unfamiliar. And now, you repeat the same gestures, measuring powders by eye, adding water one drop at a time, stopping when the consistency feels just right between your fingertips. No exact formula. Just memory. Just muscle. Just care. You dress next, pulling a simple linen sheath over your head. If it's a special day, you might dust your chest and shoulders with a pinch of powdered gypsum mixed with crushed dried petals. Or trace a bit of blue pigment along your collarbone. Made from ground lapis lazuli if you're rich, or dyed silica if you're not. One mainstream fact: cosmetic recipes were sometimes inscribed on papyri and kept in temples, collected like spells. Some even survive. One scroll lists a treatment for fine lines involving boiled donkey milk, ground alabaster, and honey. Another recommends crushed ebony mixed with palm oil to darken eyebrows. It's not clinical. It's poetic. Each formula is both a ritual and a recipe. And some were downright strange. One fringe tidbit found in a healing manuscript suggests a paste made from crocodile dung, honey, and milk as a face mask for radiant skin. Did it work? Hard to say. Was it used? Absolutely. At least until the Ptolemies replaced it with more Greek-inspired creams. Still, it reminds you, beauty has always lived somewhere between daring and devotion. You walk through the house now, and others are busy too. A servant strains oil through cloth. A girl grinds pigment while humming softly. A man rubs pumice on his feet and then oils his ankles until they shine. You all participate in this ritual, day after day. Not to seduce. Not to impress. But to prepare. Historians continue to debate just how widespread these recipes were, whether the poor used homemade substitutes or whether even basic ingredients like galena and ochre were distributed widely through the market stalls. Some believe cosmetic access was surprisingly broad, thanks to Egypt's mineral wealth and trade networks. Others argue that beauty was still a privilege, marked by time and tools, not just materials. But you know this: whatever your status, you would have had something. A pot. A powder. A mirror shard. Even a pebble smoothed to reflect light. Enough to remind yourself that your body was worth tending. That your face deserved color. That your skin was sacred. And so you end your morning not with a flourish, but with a breath. The sun is fully risen now. Your face is painted. Your oil is absorbed. Your hands are stained with ochre, your cheeks warm, your eyes sharp. You step outside into the noise and brightness of the world, and no one gasps or gawks. They only nod. You look exactly as you should. The sun is high overhead now, flooding the courtyard in gold. You've washed, painted, oiled, perfumed. And now comes the part that sparkles. Because for the ancient Egyptians, beauty wasn't complete without jewelry. Not just decoration. Not even just status. Jewelry was your identity, your protection, your spellbook worn out in the open. Every bead told a story. Every metal held meaning. And to walk through the world without it? That would feel unfinished. You begin with the basics. Around your neck, a broad collar, the iconic wisek, layers upon layers of beads strung tightly across the collarbones. Rows of turquoise, carnelian, lapis lazuli, feldspar, faience glazed into bright blue and green. Some beads are shaped like lotus petals, others like sacred eyes, tiny birds, or flattened discs. The weight is noticeable. Not heavy exactly, but present. Like armor made of joy. The collar is fastened at the back with cord and a small golden clasp shaped like a scarab. A symbol of rebirth. A reminder that you, too, are meant to rise and be transformed. The Egyptians didn't wear symbols of beauty, they wore symbols that made them beautiful. Lapis for truth. Carnelian for energy. Turquoise for vitality. Everything had a job. Then, earrings, if your ears are pierced. Small golden hoops, or delicate studs shaped like papyrus flowers. Rings next, on every finger, if you're wealthy enough. Some with inlaid stones, others with protective inscriptions. You twist one shaped like a lioness around your finger and remember that it's not just about looking fierce. That's Sekhmet, goddess of war and healing. A quiet prayer with claws. Bracelets follow. You layer them up your arms, gold cuffs, beaded wraps, coiled bronze serpents that wind toward your elbows. One has a small charm attached, the ankh, symbol of life. Another bears a winged vulture, stretching protectively along your wrist. Even your ankles are wrapped, bracelets again, or bells, or leather cords hung with shells. And if you're dressing for something special, a celebration, a ritual, a seduction, there's more. A belt of beads that rests just above your hips. A pectoral pendant that hangs between your breasts, close enough to the heart to feel symbolic. And always, the eye. The eye of Horus, painted or carved or strung into your collar, protecting your health, guarding your sleep, watching over your journey between worlds. One mainstream fact, in tombs from Amarna, researchers have found entire chests of jewelry, categorized, labeled, arranged like sacred libraries. Queen Ti's collection included dozens of matching sets. Gold wire worked so thin it bent like thread. Faience glazed so brightly it looked like polished stone. Beauty, status, magic, all stacked together. Jewelry wasn't just luxury. It was language. You didn't wear blue. You wore Nile. You didn't wear shiny. You wore divine fire. Your choices were read instantly. Were you invoking Hathor, goddess of love? Were you appealing to Batet, the cat goddess of home and fertility? Were you praying, resisting, remembering, protecting? Even the materials carried layers of meaning. Gold was the flesh of the gods, untarnishable, eternal, warmed by the sun. Silver, rarer and often more precious, was the bones of the gods, cool, luminous, mysterious. Faience symbolized regeneration. Glass, when it appeared, mimicked precious stones so effectively it blurred the lines between imitation and transformation. You fasten a thin chain around your waist, each link shaped like a lotus bud. Not for seduction, exactly, but for rhythm. The gentle sway of it as you walk is like a quiet signal: I am present. I am protected. I am aware. And here's something quirky: even hairpins could be enchanted. Some were carved with frogs, symbol of rebirth, others with cobras, symbol of sovereignty. A simple wig accessory might double as a protective amulet. You were never wearing just one thing. Every piece did triple duty. Adornment, message, shield. Children wore jewelry too. Small protective amulets on leather cords. Sometimes shaped like hands or fish or tiny thrones. Some were chewed at the edges, proof that even infants understood the comfort of something meaningful around the neck. Historians still argue whether jewelry was standardized or personalized. Did everyone wear the same gods, the same colors, the same meanings? Or did each woman, each man, build a private vocabulary of beauty, a silent alphabet of their own design? We may never know for sure. But the tombs suggest both. Shared symbols. Unique combinations. You walk now through the house, your jewelry catching sunlight in scattered sparks. Someone glances up from across the room, and you feel it, not admiration exactly, but recognition. They see who you are. They see what you've chosen to show. That scarab on your collar. It tells them you value transformation. Those lapis beads. That you're invoking truth. That gold ring shaped like a coiled cobra. That you walk with protection. And yet, none of it feels loud. None of it feels boastful. Because in Egypt, beauty wasn't performative. It was integrated. You weren't announcing your wealth. You were harmonizing with the world. The color of your necklace matched the river. The glint of your bracelet mirrored the sun. The stones on your anklet felt like prayer beads. You were not adding beauty to yourself. You were participating in it. You pass a carving on the wall: Hathor, seated on a throne, wearing a manat necklace with 4 rows of beads so thick it bulges at the shoulders. In her hands, she holds a mirror and a sistrum rattle. Her earrings are sun discs. Her armbands are etched with lotus vines. And she smiles, gently, endlessly. Not because she's proud, but because she is in tune. Another woman, lesser known, appears on a fragment of limestone nearby. Her only adornment is a single ring and a collar of faience beads. No gold. No silver. But still, dignity radiates from her. Her pose is composed. Her balance is perfect. The message is clear: you don't need everything. You just need what's right. One unusual discovery, buried with a noblewoman, a silver toe ring etched with the phrase, "Walk softly, for the ground is sacred." Imagine that, adorning your feet not for anyone to see, but because even the dust beneath you deserves ceremony. You pause now at the edge of the courtyard. Your reflection stares back from a polished bowl of water. The kohl, the oils, the color, they're all still there. But what strikes you now is the shine. The glint of gold at your throat. The cool weight of lapis at your ears. The way every step feels a little heavier, not in burden, but in substance. You have adorned yourself, not to become someone else, but to remind yourself who you already are. And the Egyptians understood that. They knew that beauty wasn't something you chased. It was something you called forth. You didn't wear jewelry to impress. You wore it to activate. To awaken. To bind intention to body. You walk back inside, your bracelets chiming softly with every movement, like wind chimes woven from metal and prayer. And in that sound, in that shimmer, you understand the ancient truth the Egyptians lived by. To decorate the body is not vanity. It is vocabulary. It is memory. It is magic. The breeze shifts as you walk past the herb garden, bringing with it a strange mix of scents, mint, fennel, and something else beneath it. Something sharp. A little sour. A little real. Because if there was one beauty challenge the ancient Egyptians couldn't quite conquer, it was this: their teeth. You might look flawless in your gold jewelry, with your kohl-lined eyes and scented skin. But open your mouth. That's where the illusion falters. Because even in the land of divine symmetry and endless oils, there was one unavoidable truth: Egyptian teeth were often a disaster. And it wasn't from sugar, as you might think. It was from bread. Most daily bread was made from emmer wheat and barley, ground on rough stone querns passed down for generations. Over time, tiny bits of grit and quartz from the grinding stones would mix invisibly into the flour. And that flour? It got baked into everything: flatbreads, sweet loaves, beer mash. With every bite, your enamel wore down like sandstone under wind. Slowly. Daily. Relentlessly. You could brush with twigs. You could rinse with natron. You could chew sweet herbs. But you couldn't undo what the bread did. It scratched your molars from the inside out. Archaeologists examining mummies have found teeth ground nearly flat, some cracked down the middle, others blackened and infected all the way into the jaw. One noble woman, buried in pristine linens with painted toenails and beaded anklets, had an abscess so severe that her jawbone had begun to dissolve. A priest with immaculate makeup had barely 2 molars left intact. Even Ramses II, one of the most powerful pharaohs in history, had tooth decay so advanced it likely caused him chronic pain and inflammation. His mummy shows signs of gum disease and impacted molars. A face of a god. A mouth full of rot. And still, they smiled. Or at least, they tried to. That doesn't mean they gave up. Oral hygiene existed. Chewing sticks from the Salvadora persica tree, what we now call the toothbrush tree, were common. These fibrous twigs, chewed at one end to form a brush, were used to scrub teeth and freshen breath. Others used palm fronds or carefully shredded wood tips. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked, at least a little. You crouch in the corner of a warm kitchen now, watching someone prepare their morning rinse. A small bowl of water is mixed with a pinch of natron, a few drops of lemon juice, and a sprig of fresh mint. It fizzes faintly. You sip it, swish, spit. Then suck on a fennel seed for good measure. Your tongue feels cleaner. Your breath sweeter. It's temporary. But that's not the point. For those with means, there were recipes. Scrolls preserved in the House of Life, part temple, part library, record mixtures made with crushed malachite, cinnamon bark, and honey to soothe the gums. Others called for boiled juniper berries, salt, and pounded myrrh resin. Strong, bitter, and likely antimicrobial. These remedies didn't rebuild teeth, but they managed the damage. A numbed nerve. A softened inflammation. Just enough to keep you smiling. And here's a quirky tidbit that always raises eyebrows. One ancient remedy for toothache involved placing a dead mouse, steeped in date wine and herbs, directly onto the sore gum. Perhaps the mouse was believed to draw out the pain, or symbolically take it on. Perhaps it was a stand-in for something darker, like a demon or disease spirit. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or an early form of sympathetic magic. Either way, it was tried. More than once. But if teeth were tricky, breath was easier. Breath mattered. In Egypt, the breath wasn't just air. It was life force. The car rode on the breath. Sacred prayers flowed through it. And bad breath? That wasn't just a social faux pas. It was spiritually dangerous. Priests before temple rites would chew bundles of coriander, juniper, or cardamom, cleansing their breath before speaking divine names. Lovers exchanged garlands of basil, sweet marjoram, and lotus petals, not only to wear, but to breathe in while whispering close. Mothers taught children to chew on mint before speaking to elders. To clean the mouth before prayer. Words needed to be beautiful too. One mainstream fact, many tombs included small pouches of dried herbs and resins, not just as offerings to gods, but as breath fresheners for the deceased. The belief was that even in death, you might have to speak, before Osiris, before the weighing of your heart, and you'd better not have garlic breath when the gods leaned in to listen. Some wealthier individuals used tooth powder, a gritty blend of ground pumice, salt, dried iris petals, and sometimes crushed eggshells. You'd apply it with a finger or reed, scrub gently, and rinse. The taste was harsh. The effect brief. But it gave the sensation of polish. A temporary illusion of order inside the chaos of the mouth. You sit now by a shaded pillar, grinding a few ingredients of your own. A pinch of dried clove, a few flakes of myrrh, and a spoonful of raw honey. You pound them together with a stone pestle, mix with warm water, and swirl it over your tongue. The flavor is rich. Heavy. Then cool. Then sharp. You swallow just a little. Enough to feel the warmth settle in your chest. Even children had rituals. They were given softened sticks to chew. Mothers taught them to gargle with salted water or hold mint leaves in their cheeks. Old women passed down recipes, some effective, others less so. One even advised sucking on alabaster pebbles soaked in vinegar to calm bad breath. The logic? Who knows? But the faith was real. Historians continue to debate whether oral hygiene was widespread or reserved for the elite. Did farmers chew sticks too? Did servants have access to mint? Or was beauty of the mouth something reserved for those who spoke publicly, priests, scribes, lovers of kings? The records are unclear. But one thing's certain, someone cared enough to leave behind the recipes. Someone believed beauty started with the tongue. And sometimes, vanity met desperation. There's evidence that some Egyptians, rich ones, had early dental prosthetics. A few skulls have turned up with gold wire binding loose teeth to neighboring molars, like braces before their time. Were they functional? Probably not. But symbolic? Absolutely. A mouth full of gold was the mouth of the divine. You rise and walk toward the reflection pool, passing a young man rubbing crushed carob pods on his gums. A woman with a toothpick made from palm fiber, prying out bits of bread from her molars. Another with a pot of clove paste held delicately between her thumb and forefinger like perfume. Everyone managing what the bread has broken. Because despite everything, despite the erosion, the grit, the infections, you still open your mouth. You still speak. You still smile. Even if it hurts. You adjust your collar, smooth a bit of oil over your lips, and glance at your reflection in the water. Not flawless. But radiant. Because in a land where bread could ruin your teeth and breath had to be cultivated like a garden, beauty still bloomed. One stick. One rinse. One whispered herb at a time. And you, sand-scarred teeth and all, are still worthy of being heard. The sun begins its slow descent, and the shadows stretch long across the temple floor. You find yourself moving more quietly now, less from weariness, more from reverence. The air here is cool and dim, filled with the low hum of beeswax candles and the faint, dusty breath of long-held incense. This is not a space for adornment in the everyday sense. This is where beauty becomes something else entirely. This is where beauty turns into magic. Because in ancient Egypt, the line between the physical and the spiritual wasn't just blurred, it was non-existent. Every cosmetic jar, every oil vial, every pigment stone was a vessel not only of color and scent, but of power. When you painted your eyes, you weren't just enhancing your gaze. You were invoking divine protection. When you oiled your body, you weren't just moisturizing. You were harmonizing with sacred forces. And when you braided your hair, tied on amulets, or pressed kohl along your lids, you were casting daily spells. You settle before a low altar table, carved with images of Hathor, goddess of beauty, music, love, and fertility. Her face is serene. Her headdress a sun disk cradled in cow horns. Around her neck are rows of beads. She is beautiful. And she is powerful. The two are the same. A small mirror lies before you, bronze, slightly warped with age, but still reflecting your image in soft amber. It's no ordinary tool. Mirrors were sacred. They were called Ankh of the face, life for the face. Their polished surfaces were believed to be connected to the sun itself, capable of revealing truth and repelling evil. You reach for it, hesitating just slightly before lifting it. Looking into it feels like something between a prayer and a challenge. One mainstream belief: cosmetics were used in religious ceremonies as both offerings and tools. In temple rituals, priests anointed statues of gods with perfumed balms and lined their eyes with green malachite and black kohl. Not because the gods needed beautifying, but because doing so activated their presence. Beauty wasn't frivolous. It was ritual precision. An interface between the mortal and divine. Your hand hovers now over a small container of green pigment, made from ground malachite, the same stone the god Horus was said to bleed when wounded. You dab it gently on your eyelids, tracing upward in a smooth arc. The sensation is cool, silky, strangely calming. In this moment, you don't feel like you're decorating yourself. You feel like you're tuning into something, aligning, refining, warding. Because malachite wasn't just color. It was protection. Believed to shield the eyes from illness, to repel malevolent spirits, to reflect away the evil eye. Just like galena, the black lead or used for kohl, which served both as eyeliner and solar armor. It darkened your gaze and, legend held, deflected the sun's harsh rays. Not just beauty, barrier. There's a fringe theory that temples kept specialized cosmetic priests, whose sole job was to anoint, paint, and perfume divine statues. They weren't stylists. They were conduits, cosmetic shamans. Every brushstroke was a chant. Every scent release, a breath of invocation. And when a priest painted a statue, it was believed that God entered it, briefly, fully, gloriously. Even among the living, beauty rituals carried weight. A woman might mix a red ochre lip paste while murmuring blessings for fertility. A man might apply kohl while whispering invocations for clarity, vision, strength. A mother might rub scented oil into her baby's scalp while chanting the names of protective deities. These weren't just gestures of care. They were spells, soft, fragrant, rhythmic. And magic didn't stop at makeup. It curled into every corner of beauty. Amulets, for instance, weren't just charms. They were coded symbols, carefully chosen and meticulously placed. A blue glazed eye of Horus tucked behind the ear, to protect the mind. A tiny frog figurine woven into a girdle, to encourage fertility. A miniature lion-headed Sekhmet pendant resting between the collarbones, to ward off illness. Your jewelry didn't just shine. It watched. It bit. It blessed. Historians still argue whether these rituals were personal or communal. Did each woman build her own vocabulary of magical beauty? Or did society dictate strict formulas? Some texts suggest private prayers whispered over each application. Others describe standardized temple rites. It's possible both were true. Public rituals followed one rhythm. Private rituals, another. You shift slightly now, reaching for a jar of myrrh resin, sticky and golden. The scent is rich, dense, grounding. You warm a bit between your fingers, then smooth it along your neck. Not perfume. Not tonight. Tonight it's a seal. Myrrh was sacred. A scent of the gods. Used in embalming, yes, but also in resurrection. It didn't just preserve the body. It called the spirit back. One surviving papyrus details a spell involving cosmetics, where a woman applies a red ochre balm while repeating the phrase, my face shall shine like Ra, and no darkness shall follow me. It's half charm, half affirmation. Equal parts vanity and faith. There's even evidence that makeup palettes were buried with spells etched beneath the stone. Imagine that, your daily compact carved with a hymn to Hathor, or a plea to Isis for safety in childbirth. You opened your mirror not to fix your face, but to focus your soul. You move to your knees now, sweeping spilled powder back into its jar. The motion is slow. Meditative. You realize, the Egyptians didn't separate beauty from belief. They didn't ask whether their rituals were science or faith. They just practiced. Repeated. Honored. And in doing so, made the act of beautifying holy. And yes, some of it was practical. Kohl did reduce eye infections. Natron killed bacteria. Scented oils softened skin and masked the scent of sweat. But for the Egyptians, the fact that beauty work didn't make it less sacred, it made it more. If the gods had given them materials that both healed and adorned, that was evidence of divine generosity, not coincidence. You glance now at a line of small statues along the altar wall, each figure radiant, painted, poised. Not a single one is plain. Even the scribes and servants in the tomb paintings wear kohl and earrings. Beauty wasn't elitist. It was human. And in the hush of this room, lit only by flame and memory, you begin to understand something deeper. Beauty in Egypt wasn't aspiration. It was alignment. A kind of cosmic symmetry. To anoint your body was to enter into rhythm with the sun. To paint your eyes was to mirror the gods' eternal gaze. To scent your skin was to carry music in the air around you. You rise, slowly, the scent of myrrh still clinging to your fingertips. The mirror glows amber in the waning light. You touch your eyelids once more, feeling the cool smoothness of the pigment. Your breath is steady. Your limbs are warm. You are not dressed up. You are enchanted. And somewhere, in the quiet curve of Hathor's carved smile, you feel something smile back. You're walking now through the sunlit courtyard of a well-kept villa, where fig trees sway lazily in the breeze and the flagstones are warm beneath your feet. There's a humming of insects in the shade, a trickling fountain somewhere out of sight, and the faintest echo of laughter, male voices, relaxed, rising from the private baths just ahead. You turn the corner, and there they are, a trio of men, stripped to the waist, seated on low stools beneath a trellis of vines. Not warriors. Not laborers. These are men of position, scribes, priests, dignitaries, lean and polished and fragrant. You might think of beauty in ancient Egypt as a woman's domain, but that would be a mistake. Because in truth, men were just as deeply immersed in grooming, in scent, in self-presentation. Not in vanity, exactly. But in performance. In ritual. In power. A man's appearance was his resume. His fragrance, his introduction. His skin, his signal. To be admired was to be respected. To be polished was to be prepared. And first came the razor. Hair, for Egyptian men, was mostly optional, and often considered a liability. Clean-shaven faces, smooth scalps, bare chests, this was the ideal. Not just because of the climate, though that helped. It was about order. Control. Cleanliness. A smooth face was civil. A well-oiled scalp was wise. Hair was for animals, for enemies, for chaos. So you shaved. And not casually. Barbers were important figures, some even had specialized stalls in temples and markets. A man of means might have a personal groomer, someone to oil the skin, scrape the scalp, pluck stray hairs with a bronze tweezer. Razors were usually made of copper or bronze, shaped like tiny sickles. Some were so beautiful they looked more like jewelry than tools. And you didn't rush the process. You submitted to it like a ritual. You knelt. You tilted your head. You offered up your neck. And you emerged transformed. Still, not every man shaved everything. Many wore small goatees or trimmed mustaches, and false beards, especially ceremonial ones, were common among officials and royalty. You've probably seen them in those famous statues, long, squared off, stiff as if starched, often braided and tied with ribbons. They weren't real. They were symbols of divine authority. Even female pharaohs like Hatshepsut wore them in official portraits, because the beard wasn't gendered, it was godly. You pause now beside a cedarwood cabinet where grooming tools are laid out, bronze razors, obsidian tweezers, a small ivory comb, and a pot of dark paste. You dip a finger into it and sniff, frankincense, cedar oil, and something peppery. A cleansing balm. Antiseptic. Sharp. Just the thing for post-shave skin. You press a bit along your jaw, and it tingles faintly. Beyond shaving, skin was everything. To be smooth, supple, unblemished, that was not vanity. That was duty. Men spent time daily applying oils to their arms, legs, chest, and face. Castor oil, morina oil, sesame oil, each with different properties. Some softened. Some cooled. Some scented. And if you were truly wealthy, you had oil mixtures custom blended, infused with cardamom, cinnamon bark, or juniper resin to suit your rank or mood. One mainstream fact, many tombs of elite men contained not weapons or scrolls, but perfume jars, cosmetic palettes, and ointment spoons, carved into the shapes of gazelles, lotus flowers, or swimming girls. These weren't mere decorations. They were daily tools of transformation. You join the other men now under the vines, sitting on a stool as a servant pours warm water from a decorated pitcher over your hands. Another steps behind you, massaging oil into your shoulders with quick, efficient pressure. Your skin glistens. You feel both heavier and lighter, anchored by care, lifted by scent. And about that scent, it wasn't subtle. Egyptian men wore perfume boldly. Cones of perfumed wax were pressed onto shaved scalps or tucked behind the ears, melting slowly through the day. Popular blends included kifi, a dark, spiced compound made of wine, honey, myrrh, and dozens of herbs, designed to soothe the body and sanctify the soul. The smell was smoky, sweet, and lingering, almost like being inside a memory. There's a fringe theory that specific perfumes were tied to professional identity. Scribes might wear one blend, guards another. It wasn't law, but custom. Recognition by scent. Your fragrance walked into the room before you did. Clothing mattered, too, clean, pressed linen in crisp pleats. Simpler cuts for younger men. More elaborate kilts and sashes for elders. Jewelry was minimal but meaningful, a wide collar, perhaps, or a lapis signet ring bearing your name in hieroglyphs. And always, the ever-present kohl. Men lined their eyes in black not to seduce, but to protect, from glare, from infection, from evil. Historians still argue whether male grooming in Egypt was a personal passion or a public obligation. Was it enjoyed, or endured? Did men relish their hours with the razor and oil, or did they submit to it as one more performance of status? Perhaps both. But the evidence suggests it mattered. Deeply. Even laborers took pride in their appearance. Wall paintings show boatmen with trimmed beards, farmhands in neatly tied headcloths. They may not have had exotic oils or ivory razors, but they had dignity. And for the Egyptians, dignity was a form of beauty. You lie back now on a woven mat in the shade, your skin still warm from oil, your face faintly glowing with kohl and balm. A servant brings a small bowl of cooled wine, steeped with herbs. You sip. The flavors bloom across your tongue, tart, earthy, faintly floral. Someone nearby is grinding lotus petals for perfume. The air thickens with it. Your mind wanders to the painted tombs where men are shown feasting, their arms bare and shining, their expressions calm. Not aggressive. Not sweaty or strained. But composed. Groomed. Fragrant. Even in death, they are ready to be received. And when they arrive before Osiris, judge of souls, you can imagine them stepping forward without fear. Oiled, shaved, lined, dignified. Their beauty not performative, but protective. Their grooming not surface deep, but soul aligned. Because in Egypt, a beautiful man wasn't soft. He was ordered. He had tamed the chaos of the world into his own skin. And that, smooth jaw, scented scalp, polished limbs, that was not vanity. That was divine preparation. You roll your shoulders slightly, the oil beneath your tunic making your skin feel supple, almost slick, like you've been dipped in amber. The late afternoon light glints on the surface of the water basin beside you, and you lean forward to examine your reflection, not with vanity, but with calculation. The shape of the kohl around your eyes widens them, gives you a look of quiet confidence, of calm power. Nearby, another man adjusts the drape of his pleated linen, smoothing the folds with deliberate hands. His fingers are stained faintly pink from ochre or rose petal balm, and he doesn't seem to mind. He ties a leather cord around his upper arm, not for function, but for fashion, decorated with small carnelian beads. Everything about him, his scent, his posture, his careful gestures, suggests awareness. The kind of awareness that moves through the world not trying to dominate it, but to shape it gently in his favor. Sometimes, grooming went beyond daily rituals. Before festivals or temple visits, men might paint their nails with crushed henna or black powder. These details weren't considered feminine, they were elegant. Precise. Intentional. One quirky tidbit from a lesser-known tomb painting depicts two men sharing a single wig between them during festival preparations. Laughing, teasing, fixing each other's kohl. It's intimate, almost tender. A reminder that grooming could also be social. A bond. A ritual not just of self-beautification, but of connection. You now stand again, refreshed. Your skin smells of sandalwood and citrus. Your scalp tingles beneath your linen headwrap. A breeze passes through the courtyard, catching your tunic and pressing it gently against your frame. Somewhere nearby, someone fans away the heat. You hear the creak of a barber's stool and the click of a razor being sharpened. And you wonder what it would feel like to move through your own world with this kind of preparation. This kind of intentional softness. To be clean, not just in body, but in gesture. To walk without dust on your feet or stress on your shoulders. To meet the day already anointed. Because in this place, grooming isn't about hiding flaws. It's about revealing your alignment with order, with beauty, with the sacred rhythm of the Nile. A final rinse, a slow breath in, and you're ready. Not for battle. Not for labor. But for presence. Groomed. Grounded. Glowing. You're back inside now, just past the edge of the main living quarters, where the stone floors cool your feet and the shadows fall softer. There's a window above you, carved like a lotus bloom, casting a petal of golden light onto the bench in front of you. On that bench, a tray of curious things. Carved bone combs. Slender pots of pigment. Tiny linen-wrapped bundles. And resting beside them, coiled in a sun-warmed dish, is what looks like beeswax. Smooth, golden, faintly translucent. It smells of flowers, and something faintly animal. Something alive. Because in ancient Egypt, beauty wasn't just about pigments and powders. It pulsed from the natural world. It crept, buzzed, bloomed, slithered. The animals that roamed the deserts and Nile shores weren't just background, they were participants in the rituals of beauty, power, and purification. And some of them made their way directly into the ointments, powders, and perfumed cones you've come to know so well. You pick up the beeswax and turn it slowly in your fingers. It softens at your touch, pliable and scented like sunlit clover. Bees were sacred in Egypt, symbols of rebirth, royalty, and divine order. The tears of Ra, legend said, fell to the earth and became bees. Their honey was used in healing and food, yes, but the wax. That was cosmetic gold. It bound oils into balms. It sealed perfumes. It smoothed lips. It soothed skin rubbed raw by linen collars. Melted and blended with crushed resin or myrrh, it became the base of many of the scented cones worn on shaven heads, slowly melting throughout the day, releasing fragrance like a prayer in motion. One mainstream historical fact: beeswax was essential in ancient Egyptian beauty routines, used in depilation, perfumery, and even as a medium for shaping wigs or taming stray hairs. Wealthy men and women alike used it to fix their wigs in place, especially during long ceremonies where elegance couldn't afford to melt. You lean over and spot something else on the tray: 2 little pouches, stitched from papyrus fiber and tucked closed with reed twine. Inside one, powdered ox hooves, crushed and calcined, used in nail polish and occasionally even in eyebrow darkener. And inside the other, crumbled crocodile dung. You pause. Yes, that one's real. Some recipes recommend mixing it with honey or sour milk and applying it as a skin treatment, either as a sunscreen, a blemish remedy, or even a fertility charm rubbed gently on the abdomen. Quirky? Undoubtedly. Effective? Questionable. But in a world where fertility, health, and beauty were tightly interwoven, even crocodiles found their place in the morning routine. Crocodiles themselves were sacred to Sobek, the fierce god of strength and virility, with temples dedicated to his scaly form scattered along the Nile. If bees were subtle messengers of divine order, crocodiles were raw, reptilian might. And their byproducts, odd as it sounds now, carried spiritual weight. You imagine the scene: a woman, sitting quietly in her garden, patting her face with a cloth dipped in honey and a substance whispered to bring the gods closer. There's a fringe theory, still debated among scholars, that such animal ingredients weren't just practical but symbolic. That using parts of the crocodile, the bee, or even the gazelle wasn't meant to enhance appearance alone, but to absorb qualities. To become fearless, graceful, productive. A kind of sympathetic magic through daily routine. And in this worldview, beauty wasn't about imitation. It was about invitation. You invited the traits of nature into your body through ritual, pigment, and scent. You look down now at the smooth stone palette beside the tray, where a small dish of crushed carmine beetles has been mixed with oil into a vivid lip stain. The color is lush, a deep pomegranate red. Not painted on thickly, like modern lipstick, but dabbed with care using the tip of a reed. A little bit goes a long way. This beetle, the cochineal, wasn't native to Egypt, at least not in the vast numbers later seen in the Americas, but similar insects, like kermes, were. The bold reds they yielded were highly prized. More than decoration, red was the color of life, passion, and divine blood, a link to Isis and her protective fury, to the heat of the sun, to vitality itself. In a sense, it wasn't just color. It was energy made visible. Historians still argue whether such insects were reserved for the elite, or if lower-class Egyptians also had access to these striking dyes. Some papyri suggest that cheaper alternatives, clay or iron oxides, were used in place of crushed insects by the average woman. But others insist the presence of beetle-derived dyes in modest burials points to wider use. Perhaps the color mattered more than the source. Perhaps red, no matter its origin, carried power in the same way. You press your finger gently into the red stain and touch it to your lips. It tastes slightly bitter, earthy, with a faint metallic note. But it feels charged. Even now. And then, there are the cats. You catch a glint of movement in the corner of the room, a sleek, spotted feline slipping through the doorway. It pauses beside you, tail twitching, eyes heavy-lidded in gold. You meet its gaze and blink slowly, as one should. It blinks back. The spell is complete. Cats weren't just pets in Egypt. They were icons of elegance. Worshipped in the temples of Batet, protector of women, home, and fertility. To walk like a cat, to move silently, to groom fastidiously, to bask in sun and shadow, was considered admirable. In fact, some scholars believe that the feline aesthetic shaped human behavior. The preference for graceful posture, the feline curve of kohl-lined eyes, even the social favor shown to those who cultivated stillness. There's a charming tidbit in one set of ostraca, a sort of ancient notepad on broken pottery, that mentions a man rejected in courtship for having the eyes of a sleepy donkey rather than those of the house cat. It's a dig. But also a clue. Even then, animals shaped expectations. Dogs, too, were kept for companionship, but they were less associated with beauty. Goats, oxen, and birds appeared often in decorative motifs, especially in tomb art, where scenes of daily life were idealized. Even the sacred ibis, long-necked and pale, became a visual model for neck jewelry and walking canes. And let's not forget the scarab beetle, a creature so central to Egyptian belief that it adorned rings, necklaces, amulets, and even mirrors. Worn not for cuteness, but for cosmic symbolism. Scarabs were sacred to Khepri, the sun god who rolled the dawn sky like a dung ball. And to wear one was to call in new beginnings. You return now to the beeswax. It's half melted from the heat of your hands, and you smooth it across the inside of your wrist. It vanishes into the skin, leaving behind a soft sheen. There's no glitter. No drama. Just the quiet glow of care. The kind of beauty that doesn't announce itself, but gathers slowly, in light and scent and movement. And in this stillness, you realize something that hums at the edge of your mind like the wing beat of a bee or the tread of a cat's paw. In Egypt, animals were not other. They weren't separate from people. They were teachers. Mirrors. Contributors. A crocodile might live in the Nile, but it might also live in your ointment. A beetle might be crushed for dye, but its shape might also guard your heart in the afterlife. A cat might kill a mouse, but she might also lead your soul through the darkness of night. Beauty here wasn't drawn in opposition to nature, it was drawn from it. Your eyes close a moment. The cat curls beside you, tail sweeping lazily across your sandal. The beeswax rests gently on your wrist. And somewhere, drifting in on the last breath of the evening breeze, is the scent of myrrh and honey and something faintly wild. Something that reminds you. Even in a world of pigments and perfumes, sometimes the softest touch, the most elegant gesture, comes from something with fur. Or wings. Or claws. And perhaps, that's the point. You're standing now at the edge of the market district in Thebes, where the breeze carries strange spices on its back, sharp, warm, unfamiliar. The clay jars here look a little different. The patterns on the linens feel bolder. And the people moving through the square, well, not all of them speak in the familiar lilting Egyptian tongue. Their accents are thicker, their clothes styled with curious folds and layers. Their skin tones range from honey to bronze to deep, luminous onyx. And suddenly you realize, beauty in Egypt didn't only come from within. It came in waves, drifting upriver like silt, carried on trade boats, war caravans, dowries, and diplomacy. And Egypt, though proud and powerful, was never fully sealed off from the world. You lean against a pillar in the shade, watching as a merchant unrolls bolts of dyed fabric, blues you've never seen before, brighter than lapis, and reds the color of wet clay. These are Nubian imports, and they gleam in the sun. Nubia, Egypt's neighbor to the south, wasn't just a land of gold and warriors, it was a style influencer in its own right. The Nubians were known for their rich skin oils, elaborate jewelry, and striking cosmetics, especially bold lip colors and high-contrast eye paints. Some of their beauty customs, like elaborate scarification patterns or twisted metal arm cuffs, were adopted by Egyptians, subtly, then increasingly boldly over time. One mainstream fact, by the New Kingdom period, Egyptian art frequently depicted elite women with Nubian hairstyles, including intricate braids and beaded extensions. These weren't just fashion choices, they were status markers. To wear Nubian styles signaled wealth, cosmopolitan taste, and sometimes, royal affiliation. The lines between local and foreign blurred in the mirror. You imagine running your fingers through one of those heavy beaded wigs, each strand a whisper from farther down the Nile. You imagine the weight. The shimmer. Further east, Mesopotamian beauty rituals crept in along with their cosmetics and craft tools, tiny jars for kohl lined in geometric metalwork, stamps for pressing designs into clay and skin. The Mesopotamians loved scent just as much as the Egyptians did, though theirs were often smokier, resinous, made from fir and pine and styrax. Some recipes even included powdered lapis lazuli, not for the eyes, but for the tongue. Mixed into pastilles and chewed to freshen breath or invoke divine favor in speech. There's a fringe tidbit that a Mesopotamian queen once traveled with a pouch of blue powder in her bodice, eaten before royal decrees to symbolize the truth of her voice. No evidence the Egyptians picked that one up, but it makes you wonder. What if beauty, too, could speak? You stroll now into the shaded vestibule of a noblewoman's house. On the vanity, a small bronze mirror, a pumice stone from Cyprus, and a jar that looks different from the others. Painted in the Greek style, with black figures against red clay. Inside, something creamy and sharp-smelling. A skin salve, maybe. Imported. Rare. By the late period, Greek influence in Egypt had grown so strong that even Cleopatra, yes, that Cleopatra, was fluent in both Egyptian and Greek, and reportedly adopted beauty routines from both worlds. She used Egyptian kohl, yes, but also Greek rosewater baths, walnut dye for hair, and scented olive oil rubs that were more Aegean than Alexandrian. Historians still debate how much of this cultural blending was welcomed and how much was tolerated. Did Egyptian elites embrace foreign beauty trends because they admired them, or because they had to keep up appearances in a changing political world? Was it curiosity? Or diplomacy? Fashion? Or fear? Some say Cleopatra's mixed beauty style was a political weapon, a way to disarm Rome while appearing both exotic and accessible. You run your fingers along the painted jar's rim. The Greeks brought more than just makeup. They brought new ideals, symmetry, proportion, youth. Egyptian art had long favored symbolism over realism. But after more contact with Greece, statues began to change, shoulders broadened, waists tightened, musculature emphasized. Even depictions of gods became more athletic, more Hellenized. In that shift, beauty took on a new angle. Not better, not worse, just different. Less spiritual, more sculptural. And you can feel it now, this current flowing beneath your feet. Beauty in Egypt wasn't static. It moved like the Nile. It changed depending on the wind, the rulers, the visitors, the trade routes. Sometimes it absorbed. Sometimes it resisted. But it always responded. You glance across the room and notice a shelf lined with glass vials, some from Phoenicia, famous for its perfume flasks. Slender and delicate, like icicles trapped in time. They hold bitter orange oil, mastic gum, frankincense tears. Imported, yes. But transformed by Egyptian hands into something layered and local. No one blended like the Egyptians. They weren't just consumers of foreign beauty, they were curators. There's a quirky image in your mind now, an Egyptian scribe carefully writing down a new beauty recipe he overheard from a visiting Hittite merchant, then adjusting it slightly, adding a pinch of myrrh here, removing goat fat there, until it felt more authentic. Like a recipe passed down and retranslated through generations, carrying the fingerprints of 5 different cultures. Even fabrics followed this path. Egyptian linen remained dominant, white, pleated, timeless. But suddenly, weavers began adding blue thread in Mesopotamian patterns, or embroidering the hems with Greek key motifs. Beauty wasn't just on the body, it was in the materials, in the textures that touched the skin. And those textures had accents now. You reach into a chest and pull out a shawl. It's soft, dyed a gentle ochre, and embroidered with tiny running gazelles, a motif borrowed from Levantine trade cloths. You wrap it around your shoulders and immediately feel something shift. Not in the air. In you. It's the feeling of belonging to more than one place at once. And this was Egypt's quiet genius, its ability to receive without being erased. To take what arrived from afar and layer it, not to hide, but to harmonize. To wear Nubian braids, Mesopotamian salves, and Greek earrings, and still walk as an Egyptian. You sip a cup of date wine and listen to the sounds drifting through the open window, sandals scraping on limestone, traders haggling in 3 languages, someone nearby grinding blue pigment for eyeshadow, maybe malachite, maybe lapis, maybe something new. And you think of how beauty never stays put. How it rides ships and crosses deserts. How it glows under different suns, in different mirrors. How it lingers in the kohl pots of queens and the woven belts of dancers. How it evolves not because it's fickle, but because it's alive. Here in this ancient villa, you wear the history of other lands on your skin, and you understand, what is foreign today becomes familiar tomorrow. Because in Egypt, beauty was never just what you saw. It was what you wore, what you touched, what you welcomed. The sun is lower now. You hear it in the silence that settles over the courtyard, in the hush that comes when shadows stretch and vendors begin to pack away their goods. The perfume of the day fades into something smokier, ashes, hot stone, linen worn soft by sweat. The beauty of Egypt gleams less in the glare now and more in the details left behind, the faint outline of kohl smudged on a worn clay cup, the shimmer of oil on someone's collarbone, the scent of crushed lotus drifting from a servant's sleeve. And it's in this quiet moment that you start to wonder, who paid for all this? Not just in coin, but in time. In labor. In sacrifice. Because if someone wore the perfume, someone had to grind it. If someone's hair was beaded, someone had to braid it. If a noble's skin glowed like polished stone, someone's hands had to apply the oil. Beauty in ancient Egypt was hierarchical, yes, but also collaborative. And sometimes, what shimmered in the palace cast long, dusty shadows down the village roads. You pass now through a back chamber, smaller, darker, full of tools. A basket of wig fiber from palm bark. Crates of crushed minerals. A stone mortar caked with red ochre. This isn't a place of glamour. It's a workroom. And it's here that much of Egypt's beauty truly began. Mainstream fact, cosmetics were manufactured in households and workshops across Egypt, often by women, and often as part of a cottage industry. Recipes were passed down orally, how many drops of castor oil, how much powdered malachite, when to stir, when to rest. A young girl might learn from her mother, mixing salves at dusk while the goats bleated in the distance. By adulthood, she might run her own stall, selling eye paints or lotions or even lending her hands to wealthier homes as a part-time beautifier. But not everyone who practiced beauty could afford to wear it. You settle onto a low stool, running your fingers along a comb carved from fish bone. It's simple. Well used. Not ornate. It belonged to someone who prized care, but not necessarily display. And that's the thing, class shaped not just access to beauty, but the form it took. A noblewoman's perfume might include imported resins and beeswax. A farmer's wife. She'd mash local herbs in oil and press it into a pot made of hardened mud. Both were fragrant. Both were valid. But one might be buried with her oils in alabaster. The other might leave hers behind on a broken dish. You picture them both, sitting under the same Nile sky, anointing their skin in the same golden light. One quirky tidbit, there's evidence that some low-status laborers, especially those working on temple estates, were given rations of oil or scented balm as part of their wages. Not money. Not bread. But skin care. It was practical, yes, helping soothe cracked hands or sunburned shoulders, but also symbolic. To be oiled was to be kept whole. Cared for. Fragrant. And it makes you wonder. Were these gifts of balm acts of kindness? Or control? Were they generous, or reminders of where one stood. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of cosmetics among commoners reflected equality, or aspiration. Were poor Egyptians truly empowered in their beauty choices? Or were they chasing a reflection of elites, mimicking kohl lines they saw in tomb paintings but couldn't afford to perfect? One camp insists that beauty was democratized, rooted in ritual, community, access to nature. Another sees it as performative, stratified, aspirational. A mirror of the pyramid itself, wide at the base, dazzling at the top. You rise from the stool now and step into a small courtyard where a servant is washing linens. Her arms are strong. Her hair is tucked beneath a cloth. She hums softly to herself, and beside her rests a tiny pot of rosewater. You ask if it's hers. She shrugs. I pressed the petals myself, she says. Not like the ones in jars, but sweet enough. And you realize, beauty didn't only flow from wealth. It bubbled up through cleverness, patience, ingenuity. If you couldn't afford cedar oil, you used fenugreek. No myrrh. Try crushed fig sap. No lapis. Use black soot or charcoal. The goal wasn't to deceive. It was to belong. To contribute. To feel clean. Present. Seen. Still, class left its marks. Wigs were costly. Jewelry, time-consuming. Even linen, so plentiful in Egypt, had its hierarchy. The poorest wore coarse, unpleated tunics. The wealthier you were, the finer the thread, the crisper the fold. High-ranking officials might even starch their linen with milk to keep it white and stiff through long days. You press your fingers into your own sleeve, feeling its looseness. You'd pass, probably, as someone respectable. But not grand. In beauty, just like in architecture, the finish revealed the funds. Yet despite these divides, certain practices cut across all levels. Everyone bathed when they could. Everyone loved fragrance. Everyone, even children, lined their eyes, not for fashion, but for protection. Kohl was a public health tool, warding off flies and infection, guarding against the evil eye. It wasn't optional. It was life. And sometimes, the simplest acts were the most beautiful. A mother washing her daughter's hair with mud soap. A boy shaving his grandfather's scalp with a bronze razor worn smooth by time. A servant scenting her master's sandals with crushed mint before a feast. These were not acts of luxury. They were acts of care. You sit for a while now on a low wall, watching as the street quiets. Two children chase each other, trailing ribbons. An old man dusts his shop sign with a reed brush. And from somewhere behind a carved screen, you hear the sound of someone laughing as she plucks a hair from her chin with a sharpened fishbone. There's no shame in it. No secrecy. Just life, unfolding. And in that moment, you understand the cost of beauty wasn't always measured in silver or gold. Sometimes it was measured in effort, in intimacy, in inheritance. In the quiet things people pass down, not jars or jewelry, but gestures. The way to tie a head wrap. The way to scent a room before guests arrived. The way to look in a mirror, not critically, but curiously. Not, do I look good? But, do I look like myself? You stretch out your legs now, leaning back against warm stone, your body faintly fragrant from the oil you borrowed earlier. There's a bit of soot on your fingertip from the kohl jar. A crease in your tunic. A scratch on your knee from a walk through dry reeds. You are not perfect. You are not polished. But you are present. And here, presence was everything. Because beauty in ancient Egypt wasn't just a product. It wasn't always glittering or fragrant. It was found in routine. In resourcefulness. In rest. Sometimes, the cost of beauty was nothing more than a pause. A breath. A shared mirror. And sometimes, it cost more than you could see, buried in the calloused hands of those who helped others shine. The room is quieter than any you've entered tonight. Even the air feels different, heavier, still, saturated with a hush you can't quite name. The stone beneath your feet is smoother here, worn not by footsteps but by ritual. A single lamp flickers from a recessed alcove, its light barely touching the ceiling. This is not a space for the living. This is a room for remembrance, return, and for the kind of beauty that is not worn but kept. You've stepped into a tomb. But this is not a place of horror. This is Egypt. Death here was not feared, it was anticipated. Prepared for. A continuation, not a cutoff. A second act. And beauty, far from fading, only became more necessary. Because when you meet the gods, you don't come ragged. You come radiant. You come ready. Mainstream fact, cosmetics and beauty tools were standard in tombs, palettes for mixing kohl, pots of rouge, even bronze mirrors and beeswax bombs. These were not symbolic gestures. They were packed with intention, like overnight bags for eternity. A person might leave this world wrapped in linen and myrrh, cheeks rouged, hair perfumed, lips tinted with a final, loving sweep. You lean in and see the faint residue of oil on the cloth. Even now, centuries later, the scent of cinnamon and resin lingers. Not loud, but present. You spot a tiny mannequin in a corner, carved with the shape of a woman, eyes rimmed with paint, her hair arranged in careful braids. One quirky tidbit, miniature cosmetic spoons shaped like swimmers or dancers were sometimes buried with the dead. Tools made whimsical. Beauty with a wink. It wasn't about utility alone. It was about joy. And across the room, a mural of the deceased entering the afterlife. They're not bowed or broken. They're upright, groomed, eyes lined, clothing flawless. This is how they wished to be remembered. Or maybe how they believed they'd be received. Historians still argue whether these rituals were meant for comfort or as a metaphysical necessity. Some believe the dead needed cosmetics to blend into the perfection of the divine realm. Others argue the tools were left as tokens, messages to say, I lived beautifully. I died prepared. You settle on the floor, back against warm stone, the cool of the tomb seeping into your spine like water into sand. And as you breathe in the stillness, you remember the workers who painted these walls, who carved those palettes, who pressed oil into small pots. Beauty wasn't an elite secret. It was built by hands. Preserved by care. And shared across centuries. In one corner, a narrow wooden chest reveals more tools, an ivory comb, a broken pot of pigment, and a pouch that once held perfumed cone wax. You pick it up gently. The wax has crumbled, but a faint scent remains. Maybe blue lotus. Maybe myrrh. In any case, it's still soft around the edges. Still human. The traces of touch linger in the fingerprints pressed into clay pots, in the faint line of bristles left on a comb. This was not sterile beauty. This was living memory made tactile. The body at the center of the tomb is wrapped in hundreds of linen strips, each carefully placed, each meant to preserve not only form but dignity. The face is covered with a golden mask, its lips are slightly upturned. Not a smile, exactly. Something subtler. Composure. Readiness. Acceptance. As if to say, I know where I'm going. And I'm dressed for it. And this wasn't limited to the elite. Even commoners were buried with oils, with pigments, with combs carved from bone. One fringed tomb showed a fisherman's wife buried with her hair still braided, her hands stained with ochre. She may not have been royalty. But she, too, was beautiful. Another tomb held a humble brewer, interred with a pouch of scented resin clutched in one hand. The value wasn't in what they owned, but in what they carried. Evidence of care, traces of ritual, a final gesture of tenderness. In a nearby niche, a painted depiction of the weighing of the heart ceremony shows the soul of the deceased facing judgment. Maat's feather floats nearby, balanced on the golden scale. The figure in the scene stands serene and adorned, cosmetics still marking their eyes, hair groomed, robe pressed. Because even in divine court, appearance spoke of reverence, of order, of readiness. You remember now how every act of grooming in life was, in a way, rehearsal for this moment. How every application of kohl, every oil rubbed into tired limbs, every braid, every bath, was not just maintenance, it was memory. A ritual etched into skin and time. Because in the afterlife, memory walked with you. The wind down begins here, not with a sudden hush, but with a soft folding inward. The light dims further, and you feel it in your bones, a quieting, a coiling inward, like linen wrapping gently around your limbs. You are not watching a burial. You are witnessing a continuation. The afterlife, they believed, was not a shadow. It was a perfected mirror. And in that mirror, beauty held its place, not as vanity, but as wholeness. To arrive complete was to arrive known. You breathe slowly. Your shoulders drop. Your limbs grow heavier, softer. The warmth from earlier lingers faintly on your skin. Your eyes drift across the wall paintings, and their colors don't shout, they whisper. Gentle blues. Golds faded to honey. Black lines curling like smoke. This is a quiet place, yes. But not a place of silence. It hums with care. You close your eyes and picture the ancient ones as they hope to be seen, well-dressed, radiant, fragrant, complete. You imagine your own name being spoken in hushed tones centuries from now, remembered not for glory, but for grace. For tending to what mattered. For carrying beauty with you, gently, even into the dark. And somewhere, softly, a breeze stirs. Or maybe it's your breath. It doesn't matter now. You stretch out beside the sarcophagus, body relaxed, heart steady. The flickering light warms your cheek. You feel wrapped now, not in linen, but in stillness. In memory. In time. Perhaps in some other world, some other version of this space, a figure sits beside your resting place centuries from now, marveling at the oils and pigments you left behind. Imagining your touch. Wondering what colors made you feel most alive. And in that moment, you live again, not as a specter, but as a whisper of beauty, carried forward. And just as the ancient Egyptians wrapped their dead in fragrance and devotion, so too are you now wrapped, in calm, in story, in light. Beauty was never about impressing. It was about remembering. And you are remembered. You close your eyes. And float.